Go ahead and open your Bibles to 2 Kings chapter 5. We'll be looking there in just a moment. But before that, I want to tell you a story about a young preacher whose name won't be named, but you can probably figure it out, who's up here recently speaking, and he learned an important lesson, or maybe multiple important lessons about making sure the mic is on. And I learned that, I learned that you got to make sure it's muted, you got to make sure, or it's not muted, you got to make sure that it's on, you got to make sure that you don't upset the engineers in the back because they have a very specific way everything's supposed to go. So I learned multiple important lessons from that. There wasn't just one lesson, and it's kind of the same when you look at Naaman. There are so many lessons from this story that we're going to look at tonight. There are so many that we don't have the time to talk about all of them, but we're going to try and hit some of the ones that I have decided are important for tonight. When we look at this story, we're going to see that it is unfolding in the midst of political tension, there's national pride, and there's religious decline. In this lesson, I want you to try and notice a few things. There are going to be some contrasts, some contrasting themes between pride and humility, between power and submission, disease and cleansing, man's ability, and God's grace. And I want you just to keep some of these things in mind. Some of them we're going to hit more than others, but I hope throughout this story you will be able to see these things contrasting one another. And so if you will, read again with me. I know we did it for the scripture reading, but it will be good to get it one more time in our minds. Verses 1 through 14 of 2 Kings 5. Now Naaman, captain of the army of the king of Aram, was a great man with his master and highly respected. Because by him the Lord had given victory to Aram, the man was also a valiant warrior, but he was a leper. Now the Arameans had gone out in bands and taken captive a little girl from the land of Israel, and she waited on Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "I wish that my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria. Then he would cure him of his leprosy." Naaman went in and told his master, saying, "Thus and thus spoke the girl who is from the land of Israel." And the king of Aram said, "Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel." He departed and took with him 10 talents of silver and 6,000 shekels of gold and 10 changes of clothes. He brought the letter to the king of Israel, saying, "And now, as this letter comes to you, behold, I have sent Naaman my servant to you, that you may cure him of his leprosy." When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, "Am I God to kill and to make alive, that this man is sending word to me to cure this man of leprosy? But consider now and see how he is seeking a quarrel against me." It happened when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, and he had sent word to the king, saying, "Why have you torn your clothes? Now let him come to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman came with the horses and chariots and stood at the doorway of the house of Elisha. And Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, "Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh will be restored to you, and you will be clean." But Naaman was furious and went away and said, "Behold, I thought he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord and wave his hand over the place and cure the leper. Are not the Abana and Parfar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean?" So he turned and went away in a rage. Then his servants came near and spoke to him and said, "My father, had the prophet told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then, when he says to you, 'Wash and be clean'?" So he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. Before we draw lessons from the story, I want us to understand where this story takes place and who are the people involved. Who's who? We got nations and kings, 2 separate nations and 2 separate kings involved. Aram or Syria, they're the same place. We've often heard of Syria when we are going throughout our Bible study. This is one of the nations. The next nation is the nation of Israel. This comes during the time of the divided kingdom. Judah and Israel have separated, and this is the northern kingdom of Israel that we are talking about. The king of Syria is most likely Ben-Hadad II. We know this from historical records, and because we know that the king of Israel at this time was Jehoram, or in some places known as Joram. These are the kings and these are the nations. This is where those happen. The arrow is pointing to Samaria, just there above Jerusalem, and Aram is in that region. Also included there would be the nation of Syria. We also have the prophet Elisha. The prophet Elisha, who God speaks to. God is the one that speaks to this man, and he is God's spokesman. He is the successor of Elijah, and he is the one that is speaking to the kings Jehoram, Jehu, Jehaziah, and Joash. All four of these kings Elisha is prophesying during their time. We also have Naaman. Naaman, who is considered maybe the main character of this story. Naaman is the commander of the Syrian army. We see this described in verse 1. And he has leprosy. We'll talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. Then there's going to be three sets of servants. We have three sets of servants. The first one is the servant girl who serves Naaman's wife, there in verse 2. The second one will be Elisha's servant who goes and sends a message or takes the message from Elisha to Naaman. And we also have other servants that are simply traveling with Naaman. So what exactly is happening here? Let's try and imagine the scene for just a minute. Naaman, one of the most decorated military officers in all of Syria, sets out on a journey south. He's riding in his chariot, followed by his caravan, which is carrying gold, which in today's day would be equal to about $5.7 million. He's carrying silver equal to about $324,000, and fine clothes, probably Gucci or something like that. All of which would have added up to about more than $6 million. He's carrying $6 million with him to go to Israel. And Naaman, in verse 1, is described as a great man, highly respected, a valiant warrior that the Lord God had blessed with victory over the land of Israel, the same land he is now going to. This is not someone you want to mess with. This is a man used to getting what he wants. This is a man used to being honored. This is a commander, not a follower, and he is certainly not accustomed to begging. But none of these accolades, none of these great things that Naaman had done could save him from a disease. None of these things could outweigh the one thing that was leprosy. The one thing in his life negated everything else that we had just read before. So Naaman is now so desperate from healing from leprosy, that he is willing to go to a foreign prophet in enemy territory which he had conquered before. In Jewish tradition, Naaman's army is the one that kills King Ahab. King Ahab would have been the father of the king of Israel at this time, Jehoram. And so this man, whose army was responsible for killing one of the kings of Israel, is now so desperate that he's willing to go to that nation for help. And he goes to that nation all on the word of a little servant girl that his wife had. Think about this. Have you ever been this desperate for something? Have you ever been this desperate to find the solution to a problem, maybe a sickness you had, that you were willing to go to just about anyone, anywhere, with just any information that might help you. Any ounce of hope. Have you ever been that desperate? That's how desperate Naaman was. Naaman was willing to go, say, to the bad side of town, to the sketchy place, to his enemies to get help. And so Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, sends a letter to the king of Israel, and the king of Israel has this little panic attack. And he's thinking, oh no, I can't do this. Why is it me? And he's having this little freak out, and here comes Elisha. And Elisha's like, I can almost picture him being like, come on, man. You tore your clothes? You ripped up your clothes again? Like, are you kings ever going to learn? Because none of the kings of the northern kingdom of Israel were ever good. And constantly prophets were sent to them. And so Elisha's one of these prophets, and he's going to this, and he's like, seriously? Just send Naaman to me. God will take care of it. God will take care of it. So Naaman arrives at Elisha's home, probably expecting an audience worthy of his status. And I can imagine him getting out of his chariot and walking up to the door and knocking. The next thing he knows, a little messenger comes out. Not Elisha, but a messenger. No prophet, seemingly no honor, no spectacle, just a simple message. Go, wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh will be restored to you, and you will be clean. Instantly, Naaman gets angry. Naaman's face burns with anger, and he's saying, the Jordan? Are you serious? That muddy little river? If he was from today's day, he'd be like, are you so for real? He expected power and performance. He expected Elisha to come out and do some great sign for him, not to be met by a simple servant, and then to go take 7 baths in this muddy little river over there. Not to mention, he had better rivers back home. Why couldn't he just do it there? How often do we see people do this same thing? Maybe they aren't commanders of an army, but people will love to say that they were going to do something so great or so impressive so that they'll be recognized for it. Some great thing in their life that they can look back to and say, yeah, I did that. But then when it comes to something small, when it comes to something repetitive that is small, they can't make the change in their life. Maybe you can't make the change in your life to repeat something, to follow a command, something small, something so simple, it seems like it won't help. But really, those things can make the biggest difference. So Naaman is storming off, upset, and his servants, luckily, they have the bravery to come to him and to say to him, my father, if the prophet had told you to do something great, would you not have done it? How much more then when he says to you, wash and be clean? And I can imagine the room going completely silent. How would you feel? Maybe if your wife or your husband, maybe even one of your children, came to you when you were upset about something, when you were frustrated, when you were angry, and they simply said to you, why are you being so dramatic? You know what you need to do. It's so simple. Why are you being so dramatic? That's essentially what his servants come here and say to him. You can almost imagine the silence as Naaman would pause, and his servants probably are worried about the response. And then Naaman turns around, goes to the Jordan, and does exactly what God says. He steps down into the water 1, 2, 3 times, nothing changes. 4, 5, 6 times, still nothing. He's probably looking at himself like, Okay, this is the 6th time. Nothing's changed. What's going on now? And the 7th time, he goes back, and then he comes out. And after he had wholly done what had been commanded of him, and only then was his flesh restored and made whole again. Notice it says his flesh is now like the skin of a little child there in verse 14. Who else in this story is said to be little? The little servant girl, the one who told him how he might be healed. You see, this mighty and great warrior had to become humble, like this little girl who had told him how to be healed in order for him to be made clean. Naaman was reborn through humble obedience to the word of God. He was reborn only when he completed all that God had commanded him, all that he had been instructed. And so what are some lessons that we can learn from this? The first thing I want to point out is Naaman's pride. Now, Naaman's pride was not that he didn't think he needed help. It's not it at all. In fact, Naaman goes to the king of Syria and he says, hey, I know of someone that can help me. Can I go? He knew he needed help. But what his pride was is that he wanted help the way he thought he should get help. He thought it was supposed to go a certain way. He had set his expectations to see it. Look there in verse 11 with me. But Naaman was furious and went away and said, behold, I thought that he would surely come out to me. His pride blinded him to the simplicity of God's command. This wasn't some great task. This wasn't some great nation to conquer. It was a simple command that he was given. And his pride said, that's not what I thought. That's not the way I pictured it. Behold, I thought. Naaman knew he needed help, but he wanted it on his own terms. He brought the money. He had the letters. He came with the power. He had set his expectations high. All of these things, the world might say, those are going to open doors. Money, that opens doors for you. Power, that opens doors for you. Set your expectations high. Those is what the world would say. But when he came with those things, he realized that God's power does not respond to wealth. It does not respond to position or the way someone looks or even their expectations of who they think God should be. God will only respond to those that come to him in humble obedience. And so what about in our lives? What does that look like in our lives? Do you ever say, behold, I thought? Sorry, clicked one more. Behold, I thought. How often do we want help? Do we need something done for us, but we only want it done our way? Like Naaman, we want things done on our own terms. Maybe it is that you say, behold, I thought my life would be better. Behold, I thought the answer would look different. Behold, I thought God would use things that I already have, my talents, my influence, my money. Why is God not doing what I thought he should do? We think I have the answers. But none of these things can truly cleanse us from our sin, from our leprosy. No matter how many accolades we can connect to our name, the money, the power, the greatness, the influence, the expectations, none of that can cleanse us from the leprosy in our lives, which is sin. Like Naaman's silver and gold, our advantages are powerless in God's eyes. Pride keeps us from receiving what God offers freely, and God cannot fill a heart that is already full of what they want. God cannot fill your heart if your heart is already full of the things that you want. Now, as we saw when we continued our reading, we saw that Naaman eventually does obey. We saw Naaman's obedience. Naaman completes God's command. Now, Naaman, in order to complete God's command, does it completely. To his credit, he does obey, and he obeys fully. Naaman had to obey completely before the healing would come. Nothing happened to him after the first 6 dips. Nothing happened after even the first one. It wasn't until he completed all 7 dips. Like I said, you can imagine Naaman going down into the water the first time and being like, oh, nothing happened. And then he goes back down into the water for the 6th time, and he's like, okay, is anything going to happen? And it wasn't until he had fully and completely obeyed what God had commanded him that he was healed. Healing only came after he had fully completed what God had commanded him. How often do we stop short of God's commands? How often do we think, yeah, I'll give that a try? Do we complete God's commands? Do we complete them? Or do we just give them a try? Do we just look at it like going to a shoe store, picking out whichever shoe you want, trying it on and being like, no, not the one? The person in the store might say, hey, I really think this one will fit. We measured your foot. This is going to be perfect. You try it on, you're like, nah. Just completely disregarding the advice. And then you go home and you realize, oh, my feet still hurt because I'm wearing shoes too small for me, because you weren't willing to complete the task. Do we complete all 7 dips in our life? Or are our relationship with God kind of like New Year's resolutions, where we say, oh yeah, I'm going to go to the gym, and we start off great. We're going strong for the first week. And then after that, we kind of just got busy and gym, whatever. How often are we saying, command, whatever? Is that something we are doing in our life? Real change will only come when obedience is complete. If you're struggling with anxiety, if you're struggling with lust, if you're struggling with lying, and you say, okay, I'm going to try praying. I'm going to try praying, and hopefully that's going to fix it. That's going to get the lust out of my life. That's going to stop me from lying. It's going to make me not worry anymore. You say a quick prayer. You think, okay, great. I did the prayer. Next day goes by. You fall into temptation again. You start worrying again. And you wonder, why has nothing changed? We wonder why. Why did nothing change the first time? Maybe it's because we never completely did what God had told us to do. Maybe we were just testing it out, seeing if it would work, but we weren't willing to make real change. We know God's commands. We know that we should start praying more, that we should be willing to forgive others, not holding grudges in our heart. We know that we should be serving, but we end up quitting when it gets hard. We say, I tried church, but that didn't fix me. I prayed once, but it didn't help. I didn't get any answer. I obeyed for a while, but it didn't seem to work. That wasn't how I thought it was supposed to go. I had, in my mind, a picture, and God that I created in my mind didn't live up to those expectations. And we wonder why. Why does nothing change? And we try and blame our problems on a fake God that we created in our minds, in our imagination. Real change will only come when our obedience is complete. When Naaman finally was healed is when he became like a little child. When he humbled himself and realized that he depended on the words that he had been told. We must also in our lives be like as Christians, we must be willing to be born again in the waters of baptism, and we need to realize that we are weak and dependent on God. We need to realize that we are poor and needy, and we must humble ourselves like the servants in this very story that we just looked at. Let's look back at the servants that are in this story real quick. Remember, I mentioned 3 different types of servants that were in this story. We have the little girl. This little girl is Naaman's wife's captive slave, taken from Israel, and she is the one that guides him to salvation. A captive taken from Israel, now serving Naaman's wife, despite being enslaved, despite Naaman killing her previous king, despite being stripped from her home as a little girl, she is the one that provides salvation. She's not the one that provides salvation. She's the one that shows him there is hope. There is salvation available. We are told that she is a little, or she is a young girl. There is no age required in the Bible that you can help others. You have no clue how helpful you might be as a young person, saying something to an older person, encouraging someone else your age to do better, to try something different, to keep going, to complete God's commands. Doug Foster told me the other week that it wasn't until his granddaughter at a young age looked up to him and said, "When are you going to be baptized for real?" that he decided that he needed it. Out of the mouth of babes sometimes is where the greatest truth is found. Out of such humble and insignificant people that we think can't do anything for us, can do the greatest things for us. Elisha's messenger. Elisha's messenger gives him the solution to the problem. Elisha's messenger wasn't the one that had gotten the revelation from God, just as we are not the ones that have gotten the revelation from God and written these amazing stories or these amazing things that have happened in history. But we have the information. We have the message we need, and we can take it to those that are in need, to those that are the lepers of this world. And we can show them that there is a solution to the problem. There is salvation. What about Naaman's traveling servants? The simple people that reason with Naaman and arrive at a simple conclusion. These simple people provide Naaman a simple solution. Sometimes all it takes is just showing them the simplicity of the commands that we are given, the simplicity of what God has said here in the text. These servants had no accolades to go along with their names. They had no great things they could boast of. They were servants. Are you willing to be a servant of God and use what God has given you to go give people a simple solution to their problems today? This isn't a fix-all money jackpot, but it does provide peace. It does give restoration, and it will bring healing. And that is exactly what happens to Naaman. Throughout this story, we see these humble voices of wisdom speaking truth to Naaman. Are you going to be someone that will listen to the quiet voices in your life? Do you value the quiet voices God has placed around you, or are you the kind of person that others can turn to for godly wisdom? Are you that kind of person that is willing to serve others and to show them God's goodness? Naaman's pride almost cost him his healing, but the wisdom of these humble people is what ended up saving him. They were not mighty people. They could not perform great signs, but they spoke the truth, and Naaman finally listened. The little girl pointed him to the prophet. The servants urged him to obey. And when he was clean, when he became humble, is when he became cleansed. When he became childlike, is when his skin was restored to that of a little child, it says in verse 14. Naaman's story here shows us a couple things. It shows us that God's grace is part, but obedience is our part. Pride is our enemy, and humility is the pathway to us healing. There is no rich man's cure. There is no poor man's cure. There is only God's way. There is nothing better we can do. And hopefully you can see the imagery in this story. Ultimately, the story of Naaman that we just covered is foreshadowing New Testament baptism. It is foreshadowing what we must do to obey. And the question for you tonight is, are you ready to humble yourself and to be obedient to God's command? Like Naaman, we must completely obey what God has said. If Naaman did only 6 dips, would it have worked? No. If we only do part of what God says, will it work? No. We must completely do what God has told us to do. If tonight you feel that you are not right with God in some way, that you have not completely given your life to Christ, whether that be through baptism or if you have already been baptized and you have slowly slipped away, please, we invite you to come while we stand and sing.